Before we begin, listen closely to the quiet beneath the city's noise. Every great city has two lives, the one it displays and the one it hides. Welcome. This is not just an audiobook. This is a literary listening experience. Here, stories are carefully narrated with attention to rhythm, atmosphere, and emotional pacing, offering a space for calm immersion and thoughtful reflection. You will not simply hear a story unfold, but sense the world that shaped it, the anxieties, hopes, and moral tensions of its time. Before the story begins, you'll hear a brief introduction to the author, the period, and the cultural texture surrounding this work. After the final words, there will be a short reflection, a distilled idea from the heart of the tale, and one or two questions to linger with. Tonight, we enter the mysteries of Paris, opening in the shadowed streets where secrets move quietly and justice waits to be claimed. Let us step into the story. Paris, in this telling, is not a postcard, but a pulse. Gaslight flickers along narrow streets, casting long shadows over doorways where lives intersect without ever meeting. Beneath the elegance of salons and boulevards lies another city entirely, one shaped by hunger, secrecy, and endurance. This is a world where fear and compassion exist side by side, where kindness can arrive disguised, and where the night listens as closely as it hides. As you enter, allow yourself to feel the tension between splendor and suffering, and the quiet human voices caught between them. The work you are about to hear is The Mysteries of Paris, written in the early 1840s and first published in serialized form beginning in 1842. Originally written in French and born in France, it emerged during a period when literature was read collectively, eagerly awaited in installments, and deeply entwined with public life. This was a Paris shaped by the aftershocks of the Industrial Revolution, a city of rapid growth, widening inequality, and restless social conscience. Its author, Eugène Sue, was born in 1804 and died in 1857. A French novelist who began his career writing adventure tales, Sue later turned his attention sharply toward social realities. He became best known for The Mysteries of Paris, a work that transformed popular fiction into a force of social awareness. Over the course of his career, he wrote numerous novels and serials, often blending melodrama, realism, and moral inquiry. His writing was influenced not only by literature, but by the political and social debates of his time, and his work would go on to shape both public opinion and the future of the serialized novel. Why does this story still matter today? Because the questions it raises have never truly faded. Written in an era grappling with poverty, crime, and the moral responsibilities of power, it mirrors our own ongoing conversations about justice and inequality. The divide between wealth and hardship, visibility and invisibility remains with us. This story speaks to listeners drawn to vivid atmosphere, social conscience, and the uneasy space where morality meets action. It is for those who want to understand not only how societies function, but whom they leave behind. If you enjoy this kind of literary listening experience, where storytelling is paired with context, care, and reflection, you are warmly invited to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your presence helps sustain a space devoted to literature as both art and insight. Now, settle in. Enjoy watching, enjoy listening, and remember, after the story concludes, there will be a brief reflection and a few thoughtful anecdotes drawn from its essence. I encourage you not to miss them. And now, we begin. Eugène Sue, Mysteries of Paris. Joseph Marie Sue, known as Eugène Sue, is the most notable French exponent of the melodramatic style in fiction. Sue was born in Paris on December 10, 1804. He was the son of a physician in the household of Napoleon and followed his father's profession for a number of years. The death of his father brought him a handsome fortune, upon the receipt of which he devoted himself exclusively to literature. His first novel, Kernock, the Pirate, which appeared in 1830, was only in a small measure successful. It was followed in quick succession by 4 others, but with like results. His next attempt was the quasi-historical Jean Cavalier. About this time, Sue became imbued with the socialistic ideas that were then spreading through France, and his attempt to express these in fiction produced his most famous work, The Mysteries of Paris, which was published in 1842. The story first appeared as a feuilleton in the Journal des Débats. Its success was remarkable, exceeded only by its tremendous popularity in book form. The Mysteries of Paris is partly melodrama. It has faults both in construction and in art. Its characters are mere puppets, dancing hither and thither at the end of their creator's string. Yet withal, the novel brought about many legislative changes in Paris through the light which it cast on existing legal abuses. Sue died on August 3rd. One cold, rainy evening towards the end of October 1838, a man of athletic build, wearing an old straw hat and ragged serge shirt and trousers, dived into the city ward of Paris, a maze of dark, crooked streets which spreads from the Palace of Justice Notre Dame. This district is the mint, or haunt, of a great number of low malefactors who swarm in the low drinking dens. The man we noticed slackened his pace, feeling that he was on his own ground. It was very dark, and gusts of rain lashed the walls. "Good arternoon, la Goualeuse, sweet throat," said he to one of a group of girls sheltering under a projecting window. "You're the very girl to stand some brandy." "I'm out of money, Slasher," said the girl, trembling, for the man was the terror of the neighborhood. He grasped her arm, but she wrenched herself loose and fled down a dark alley, pursued by the ruffian. "I'll have you," he exclaimed after a few seconds, as he seized in his powerful hand one altogether as soft and slight. "You shall dance for it," a masculine voice broke in, and under the soft, delicate skin of the hand, the Slasher felt himself grasped by muscles of iron. For some seconds, nothing was heard save the sounds of a deadly strife. The struggle was short, for the ruffian, although of athletic make and of first-rate ability in rough-and-tumble fights, found he had met his master. He measured his length on the ground. Burning with rage, the Slasher returned to the charge, whereupon the defender of La Goualeuse showered upon the cutthroat's head a succession of blows so weighty and crushing, and so completely out of the French mode of fighting, that the Slasher was mentally as well as bodily stunned by them and gave up, muttering, "I'm floored." Except the skeleton with his iron bones and the schoolmaster, no one till now could brag of having set his foot on my neck. "Well, come and drink a glass, and you shall know who I am," said the unknown. "Come, don't nurse a grudge against me." "Bear malice? Not a bit of it. Your best man, make no mistake." The three, now upon the best terms, directed their steps towards a tavern. As the unknown followed his companions, a charcoal seller approached him and whispered in German, "Be on your guard, your highness." The unknown waved his hand carelessly and entered the tavern. Over their drinks, the three related to each other their histories. The Slasher was a man of tall stature, with light hair and enormous red whiskers. Notwithstanding his terrible surname, his features expressed rather brutal hardihood and unconquerable boldness than ferocity. In his childhood, he had strolled about with an old rag and bone picker who almost knocked the life out of him. He had never known his parents. His first employment was to help knockers cut horses' throats at Montfaucon, till cutting and slashing became a rage with him, and he was turned out of the slaughterhouse for spoiling the hides. Later, he enlisted and served 3 years. Then one day, the bullying of the sergeant roused the old rage, and he turned on him and cut and slashed as if he had been in the slaughterhouse. That got him 15 years in the hulks. Now he was a lighterman on the Seine rafts. Sweetthroat was not over 16 and a half. A forehead of the whitest surmounted a face perfectly oval and of angelic expression, such as we see in Raphael's beauties. She was also called Fleur de Marie, doubtless on account of the maiden purity of her countenance. She, too, had never known her parents. When she was about 7 years of age, she lived with an old and one-eyed woman called Screech Owl because her hooked nose and round green eye made her resemble an owl that had lost its eye. She taunted the child with being picked up from the streets and sent her out begging, rewarding her with beatings if she did not bring her at least sixpence at night, until at last she ran away from Screech Owl and hid in a woodyard for the night. Next day she was found, taken before a magistrate and sent to a reformatory as a vagrant until she was 16. It was a perfect paradise compared to Screech Owl's miserable roost. But when she came out, she fell into the hands of the ogress who kept the inn they were now in. The clothes she stood in belonged to the ogress. She owed her for board and lodgings and could not stir from her, or she must be taken up as a thief. Rodolphe, for so we shall call the defender of La Goualeuse, listened with deep interest to her recital, made with touching frankness. Misery, destitution, ignorance of the world had destroyed this wretched girl, cast alone and unprotected on the immensity of Paris. He involuntarily thought of a beloved child whom he had lost, who had died at 6, and would have been, had she lived, like Fleur de Marie, 16.5 years old. Rodolphe appeared to be about 36, tall, graceful, of a contemplative air, yet with a haughty and imperious carriage of the head. In other respects, he sported with ease, the language and manners, which gave him a perfect resemblance to the ogress's other guests. He represented himself as a painter of fans. Presently, the schoolmaster entered the inn, with a woman. He was a powerful, fleshy fellow, with a face mutilated and scarred in a most horribly repugnant fashion. The woman was old, and her green eye, hooked nose, and countenance at once reminded Rodolphe of the horrible woman of whom Goualeuse had been the victim. Suddenly seizing his arm, Goualeuse whispered, "Oh, the owl, the one-eyed woman!" At this moment, the schoolmaster approached the table and said to Rodolphe, "If you don't hand the wench over to me, I'll smash you." "For the love of heaven, defend me!" cried Goualeuse to Rodolphe. He rose and was about to attack the schoolmaster when the charcoal dealer rushed into the inn and, coming up to him, whispered in German, "Your Highness, the Countess and her brother are at the end of the street." At these words, Rodolphe threw a louis on the counter and hurried towards the door. The schoolmaster attempted to stop him, but fell heavily under 2 or 3 blows straight from the shoulder. Soon after he had gone, 2 strangers entered, one in a military frock-coat, the other easily detected as a woman in male attire. She was the Countess Sarah MacGregor. They ordered drinks and proceeded to make inquiries after Rodolphe. When they left, the schoolmaster and the Screech Owl followed them and robbed them in a dark street. But they suffered the robbery quietly, and even offered the ruffian and his woman more to lay a trap for Monsieur Rodolphe. They parted, but an invisible witness, the slasher, had been present. Alarmed at the perils which threatened his new friend, he resolved to warn him. Chapter 2. On the morrow, Rodolphe again made his way to the tavern and met the ogress, with whom he had a short conversation, which resulted in his paying La Goualeuse's debts to the old hag and taking the girl for a drive in the country. They spent the day roaming about the fields. Towards evening, the carriage stopped at a farm near a pretty village, and to her amazed delight, Rodolphe told Fleur de Marie that she might stay there with Mrs. George, the mistress of the farm. He explained his sympathy for her in the loss of the child who would have been her age. Fleur de Marie could not reply. She seized his hand, and before he could prevent her, raised it to her lips with an air of modest submission. Then she followed Mrs. George, who was to play the character of her aunt. Before he left, Rodolphe said to Mrs. George, "Marie will at least find a corner in your heart?" "Yes, I shall devote my time to her as I should be giving it to him," she said with emotion. "Come, do not be again discouraged. If our search has been unsuccessful hitherto, perhaps, may the good God help you, Monsieur Rodolphe. My son would now be 20. His father would never reveal whether he lives. Since he was condemned to the galleys, entreaties, prayers, and letters have all been unanswered. The next day, Rudolph heard from the slasher of the plot against him and arranged to meet the schoolmaster on the pretext of having a profitable business on hand. The prospect of gain overcame the schoolmaster's suspicions, and he and Screech Owl met Rudolph in an inn. Rudolph unfolded his scheme of entering a house in the Allée des Veuves, the residence of a doctor gone into the country. The schoolmaster agreed, but insisted on their remaining together till the evening. On leaving the inn, Rudolph dropped a note, which he saw picked up by the pseudo-charcoal dealer, now attired as a gentleman. The three retired to an inn of evil appearance, while Screech Owl went out to reconnoiter the house and grounds. She returned to the inn with a favorable report. Suddenly, the schoolmaster threw himself on Rudolph and hurled him into the cellar, locking the door behind him. Rudolph's efforts to free himself were in vain. For hours he lay there, gasping for breath. Suddenly, when he was about to suffocate, the door was broken open, and he found himself fainting in the arms of the slasher. When Rudolph recovered consciousness, he was in his house, attended by his doctor, a Negro, and the slasher. The schoolmaster and the Screech Owl had come to enter the house. The Screech Owl had remained at the gate to watch, but the slasher, who had observed all, had silenced her with a blow. Following the schoolmaster in, he came upon him as he was overcoming one of Rudolph's men and downed him with another blow. Then the two robbers, being bound, were carried in. "Order them to bring him here," said Rudolph calmly, and the schoolmaster was carried in, bound with ropes. Rudolph addressed him. "Escaped from the hulks, to which you were sentenced for life, you are the husband of Mrs. George. What have you done with her son?" Believing his hour was come, he trembled and whimpered, "Mercy." He confessed all, even his crimes, his murders, speaking now in the grammatical French of his guiltless days. He lived in the Rue du Temple, where he passed as François Germain. He left there. Now I do not know where he is. Good. Your life shall be spared. But I will paralyze the strength you have criminally abused. Dr. David, do as I have told you." The schoolmaster was seized by two servants and carried into another room. A few minutes later, he was brought back. "You are free," said Rudolph. "Go and repent. Here are 5,000 francs. You are harmless." The two men loosened the cords which bound him, then took a bandage from his eyes. He sprang up in rage and terror, then falling back, cried in agony and fury, "I am blind!" Chapter 3. Rudolph was the reigning Duke of the German state of Gerolstein. While he was a boy, a Scotch adventuress, Lady Sarah Macgregor and her brother, Sir Thomas Seton, had appeared in the little German court and begun an intrigue that resulted in a secret marriage between Sarah and Rudolph. The old Duke, then alive, on hearing of this, annulled the marriage. To his son he gave a letter from Sarah to her brother, betraying her cold-blooded ambitions. The young prince's love had frozen. Sarah gave birth to a child in England, whither she had fled. To all Rudolph's appeals for this child, she gave no answer. She had turned it over to Jacques Ferrand, a notary in Paris. 6 years later, he reported the child's death, and both parents believed their unhappy daughter to be dead, though she was, in fact, the unfortunate Fleur de Marie. It was Sarah who now, having learned of Rudolph's presence in Paris, had hurried hither to seek an interview with him, hoping to effect a reconciliation, now that the old Grand Duke was dead, and Rudolph sovereign, Prince of Gerolstein. Rudolph was known for his fondness for strange adventures, and Lady Sarah had hoped to catch him during one of his visits to the lower quarters of the city, seeking any aid, however low. Rudolph, grateful to the slasher for saving his life, presented him with an estate in Algiers, and the following day he set out for Algeria. Rudolph was determined to find the son of Mrs. George, the unfortunate wife of the schoolmaster. He had saved her from starvation, and he meant to satisfy the great longing that still possessed her, but for some while he had no real success. Meanwhile, unknown to Rudolph, a misfortune had come to Fleur de Marie. While on a visit to a neighboring farm one evening, she was suddenly seized by Screech Owl and the blind schoolmaster and carried off to Paris. They forced an oath of secrecy from her and liberated her near a police station. Screech Owl then informed the police that a vagrant had passed down the street, and Fleur de Marie was arrested and sent to Saint Lazare. A forged note was sent to Mrs. George, appearing to be signed by Rudolph. Fleur de Marie's abduction had been caused by Sarah, who, believing Rudolph too much interested in her, decided to rid herself of a possible rival. Screech Owl was her tool. Rudolph learned of Germain's address through a second-hand dealer who had bought his furniture. He was employed as cashier in the office of a notary, Jacques Ferrand. Rudolph had heard evil reports of this man, though he was highly respected and known as a pious man. When Rudolph finally attempted to communicate with Germain, he learned that the young man had been accused of theft from notary Ferrand and imprisoned. Screech Owl conceived of a scheme to blackmail the notary Ferrand. His housekeeper, 10 years before, had turned over to her a child which she was to care for in consideration of 1,000 francs. She obtained an interview with Ferrand, but he denied all knowledge of the child. Ferrand was, in fact, thoroughly frightened. He learned that Fleur de Marie was in Saint Lazare and determined to paralyze Screech Owl's threats by removing Fleur de Marie. On an island in the Seine lived a criminal family, the Marshalls, who throve by thieving and murder. With Nicholas Marshall, Ferrand arranged that Marie was to be conducted across the river and upset. His housekeeper met the girl at the prison door after the notary had procured her release and, pretending she had come from Mrs. George, brought her down to the river. Once on the shore, the old woman signaled, and 2 boats came from the island. Fleur de Marie felt an instinctive uneasiness on beholding the foul face of Nicholas Marshall, but she seated herself in the boat with the old woman, and they shot out into the stream. Half an hour later, 2 gentlemen strolling along the opposite riverbank saw the body of a young girl floating by and rescued it. One was a doctor. Discovering signs of life, he set to work, and presently a faint glow of vitality revived. Then she was carried to his home. That same night, Screech Owl appeared at the home of Countess Sarah, keeping an appointment. Lady Sarah took the creature into her private room and locked the door, leaving open only the passage from the garden whence they had entered. "Listen," said the Countess. "I want you to find me a girl of about 17, one who has lost her parents very early, of agreeable face and a sweet temper." Screech Owl showed her astonishment. "My little lady, have you forgotten La Goualeuse?" "I have nothing to do with her," said Lady Sarah impatiently. "But listen a moment. Take La Goualeuse. She was only 6 years old when Jacques Ferrand gave her to me with 1,000 francs to get rid of her." "Jacques Ferrand?" cried Sarah. "The notary?" "Yes, what of it?" 10 years ago? Fair? With blue eyes?" "Yes." "Ah, mon Dieu, mon Dieu!" cried Sarah, falling on her knees. Suddenly she rose. Hastily opening a secretary, she took from it an ebony casket, which she opened. She took from it diamond necklaces and bracelets, throwing them on the table in her hurry to reach the bottom. "Is this she?" she cried, producing a small miniature. "Yes." Sarah took out paper and pen and began writing. "Come," she said, "as you dictate, so I write. A written declaration." She did not finish. Screech Owl brought down her arm and her dagger entered Sarah's back between the shoulder blades. She threw out her hands and fell forward on the table. Hastily gathering the jewels, the murderess slipped through the door into the garden and escaped into the dark streets. That night, the police made one of the most notable hauls of the year. They captured a group of notorious criminals in the act of murdering a diamond agent in a low-class resort on the banks of the Seine, among them all the Marshall family. In the cellar, they found the blind schoolmaster chained to a pillar. He had been confined there by his former comrades, who feared that in his helpless state he might fall under the care of honest people and reveal to them the habits of his associates. He was mad. In his arms he gripped, almost crushed, the dead and mangled body of Screech Owl, who, seeking to escape down the cellar, had stumbled within the captive's reach. Chapter 4. For some days, Jacques Ferrand's clerks noticed in the notary a curious change. He denied admission to his clients, though they knew his interests suffered heavily thereby. His face thinned, his temples hollowed, his complexion became ghastly yellow. In constant company with him was a red-bearded man, known as Bradamante. Then came the announcement that Germain had been freed from prison, the charges against him being dropped. Also that Monsieur Ferrand gave 1,000,000 francs to found a working men's bank where the poor could borrow without paying interest. Germain was to be cashier. Ferrand's sufferings were intense. Bradamante, discovered in a criminal act by Rodolphe, was now his slave and acted as his agent. Both were watched by a well-concealed circle of spies. Bradamante forced Ferrand's system of restitution under Rodolphe's directions, who had succeeded in obtaining from the notary by trick papers which proved his crimes and guilt. This was his punishment. A miser, he must give, and always a pious fraud, he was now compelled to place all his money in trust with the good, simple old abbé he had long deceived. By chance, Rodolphe now learned of the absence of the girl and the deception that had caused Madame Georges to make no inquiries. He suspected truly that La Goualeuse's abduction had been instigated by Sarah. Suddenly, an idea burst upon him. Looking over the papers taken from Ferrand, he saw that the notary had reason to fear the existence of a certain child he had turned over to Screech Owl 10 years previously. These suspicions changed to conviction when he learned that on the day of Marie's release, a woman had been drowned in the Seine. So great was his rage that he now determined to revenge himself doubly on the criminal notary. The Countess Sarah was recovering slowly. Rodolphe, believing her to be dying, consented to visit her. He found her dressed and decked in her jewels, but pale and weak. "Rodolphe, I am dying," she said. "I have something of great importance to tell you." Her agitation was intense. "Our child is not dead," burst from her suddenly. "Our child!" "I tell you, she lives." "Enough, madame. You cannot deceive me. I know your schemes." "But listen, I have proof," she cried eagerly. "I have told you the truth. You remember I had left the child with my notary to superintend her education? He was false to me. She had not died, but was disposed of to a woman known as the Screech Owl, and— "No, no, I do not believe you. I do not wish to believe you." "See," she continued, "here is her portrait." He seized the miniature. Yes, in the child's face were recognizable the blue eyes, the oval face, the fair hair, so familiar to him in Fleur de Marie. "God!" he cried. "You wretched woman! La Goualeuse, our daughter, found only to lose her again, dead." "No, she lives, Rodolphe. Pity, I die." "Your child is dead, murdered. May the knowledge curse your last moments." And he rushed from the house, leaving Sarah in a fainting condition. Meanwhile, the Marquise d'Arville, a friend of Rodolphe's, learned by chance of the presence of La Goualeuse in the house of the doctor who had rescued her from the Seine. Knowing Rodolphe's keen interest in La Goualeuse, Madame d'Arville determined to take her with her in her carriage to convey the good news to Rodolphe in person. Some days later, she appeared at Rodolphe's magnificent apartments and announced to him that Fleur de Marie was below in the carriage. Rodolphe rose, pale, supporting himself by the table. Madame d'Arville's surprise restrained him. "Ah, Clémence," he murmured, "you do not know what you have done for me. Fleur de Marie is my daughter." "Your daughter, your Highness?" Then suddenly she understood. Fleur de Marie was brought up, and it required Clémence to restrain Rodolphe so that he broke the news gently. Fleur de Marie was even then overcome, for she had loved Rodolphe as she would have loved her God. Sarah died soon afterward. Rudolph asked Clemence d'Arville to become mother to Marie, now the Princess Amelia, and they returned to Germany. On setting out, they passed in their carriage through a crowd attending an execution. Several criminals in the crowd, recognizing Rudolph, attempted to attack him. Suddenly, a man sprang forward in his defense, but was stabbed by one of the crowd and fell dying. It was the slasher. "I could not go to Algiers," he murmured. "I wish to be near you, Monsieur Rudolph." A noble prince sought the hand of the Princess Amelia, but she, feeling her past degradation, retired to a convent, where she died, beloved by all, mourned deeply by Rudolph and Clemence. Ferrand, the notary, died in convulsions, killing Bradamante with a poisoned dagger. Germain, restored to his mother, married happily, his wife's dowry coming from the prince. Paris. When we step away from this story, the city we leave behind is no longer the Paris we thought we knew. Eugène Sue's The Mysteries of Paris does far more than tell a tale. It transforms the city into a living organism. Poverty circulates through its veins, splendor gleams on its surface, and at its core beats a suppressed cry for justice. 19th century Paris is not merely a setting here, it is a sentient body, suffering, witnessing, and demanding to be seen. Sue's true achievement lies in his ability to use crime and melodrama as narrative engines, while quietly pulling the reader into a profound moral inquiry. Prince Rodolphe's descent into the underworld in disguise is not a simple heroic masquerade. It is power confronting conscience. It is an aristocracy discovering that the injustices it cannot solve from above can never be understood without going below. The relentless momentum of the feuilleton form, its cliffhangers, its urgency, becomes, in Sue's hands, a social weapon. The dark streets of the novel are not merely places where crime occurs. They are the city's unconscious mind. As in Gothic literature, everything that light cannot reach becomes a repository for repressed guilt and forgotten lives. Paris's labyrinths are the architecture of collective denial. Sue seems to whisper to us, if you wish to understand a city, begin with what it chooses not to see. When we turn our attention to Rodolphe himself, we encounter more than an idealized savior. His shadow self reveals a dangerous illusion, the belief in absolute moral authority. He wants to help, but he also wants to decide. In the language of modern psychology, Rodolphe suffers from something close to moral superiority syndrome. Even as he does good, he cannot relinquish control. This is what makes him both heroic and unsettling. Sue's boldness lies precisely here. He forces us to distrust even the good man. History sharpens this darkness. The Paris of the 1840s, in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, is a city split open by inequality. Masses of rural poor flood into urban spaces, forming invisible classes. When The Mysteries of Paris appeared as a serialized novel, workers and aristocrats read the same chapters, yet recognized themselves in radically different ways. This is why the novel was not merely a literary success, but a social event. Its influence on Victor Hugo's Les Misérables is no accident. Both works transform compassion into a political act. Seen from our own century, Sue's vision feels uncannily familiar. The city's dark alleys have migrated into data centers, algorithms, and digital ghettos. The geography of crime has changed, but its logic has not. Today's invisible classes are shaped by filters, feeds, and automated decisions. Social media algorithms, much like Sue's Paris, amplify certain lives while quietly burying others. Rodolphe's act of blending into the masses might now resemble a powerful executive entering the system through anonymity. And the question remains the same. Can true empathy exist without surrendering power? Then comes the inevitable what if. If Prince Rodolphe lived in our time, armed with AI-driven surveillance and predictive policing, could he prevent crime altogether? Or would justice simply evolve into a more refined system of control? Would suffering disappear, or merely become harder to detect? And finally, the moral knot tightens. If you were Rodolphe, standing in a city where institutions have failed, where the law cannot reach, would you take justice into your own hands? Or is that very impulse the greatest danger of all? This is where literature reveals its enduring power. The same story changes with every mind that encounters it. I invite you to share your perspective in the comments, where you stand in this story, and whose side you find yourself on, because this city cannot be illuminated alone. The Mysteries of Paris does not merely depict the 19th century, it interrogates who we are today. If you find meaning in these deep explorations of the human soul, and if you enjoy tracing the hidden connections between classic literature and modern life, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Your support allows these stories to be retold and re-examined for a new generation.